intuition is not just about woo-woo stuff, it's core part of who we are and is very practical and applies to everything we do. And especially working in tech and working in innovation and working with creative people and artists. And you realize how essential it is to vision, right? Even the work that you're doing and our calling and our passion, our intuition is a key part of that. So I really wanted to understand intuition and break it down in a way that everybody could understand it and how it affects them, even if they weren't a quote unquote psychic or artist or something that was a generalized sort of area where intuition was naturally infused. Everybody really will benefit from understanding how that intuitive part of their brain works.
I've had the pleasure of sitting down with Kim Chestney. She's the author of Radical Intuition, a revolutionary guide to using your inner power, as well as the Psychic Workshop, a complete program for fulfilling your spiritual potential. She has been teaching intuition development for over 20 years. Kim and I discuss not only what intuition is and is not, but how cultivating it gives us back the superpowers we forgot we had. In addition to her books, Kim also founded IntuitionLab, an online class and community of experts and peers to teach her innovative approach to cultivating intuition. And as a student of the lab for the last 3 years, I can certainly tell you that her approach is life-changing. In fact, intuition has become one of my core values in business. I now lead with intuition first and have found that this has been key to not only my alignment and success as an entrepreneur, but also contributes to successful collaborative projects with my clients. Kim gives us insight into her new book, The Illumination Code, where she really digs into the research of intuition and its relationship to quantum physics. Her work has been featured by organizations including ABC News, Omega Institute, the Shift Network, Coast to Coast AM, Mantra Wellness, Success Magazine. The list goes on and on. I think you get my point. Kim is leading the intuition revolution, and I believe she's just getting started. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with author Kim Chestney. The idea for this podcast really started with an intuitive hit. I didn't have this concept for a podcast at all. I was just scrolling on social media and I saw this workshop link for a podcast mastermind group that was coming together. And I had no business clicking that link. I mean, none at all. I don't know where it came from. And that's what I love about intuition, is because it just kind of pops in. And if I hadn't really studied it and worked with it as in depth as I have over the last few years, um, I may not have clicked that link. And what I also find really interesting is, one, this is like a full circle moment, right? Because like
Yeah,
we wouldn't be sitting across from each other right now if
right,
I hadn't,
right.
studied with you. But the other thing I find interesting is I still don't necessarily know where this podcast is going or where I'm going. I just know that I feel good about it,
Mm,
right? So not only have I learned to trust it, but I also have to trust where it's taking me
right,
because I don't know yet,
right.
you know? So the trust is huge. It's just understanding how to hear it, how to
Mhm.
listen to it, and to trust in following it. That's huge.
Yeah, and I think part of that's so interesting is because with intuition, you're really called to trust that little next step. Like you said, you don't know where it's going, right? With our minds, we're tempted to think that we have to know exactly how everything's going to turn, right? Like I'm going to do this podcast because I want to achieve this, this, and this, and this, and that's my goal. Whereas with our intuition, you just follow that moment, that little thing that arises in that click that you follow through that moment of connection and resonance. Or, after that, you take the next intuitive step to invite this person on the show or to do this. And it sort of starts to take on a life of its own. And that's how you get into the flow of life, is intuitively aligning that. And sometimes the flow will hit a dead end. Maybe that's not the way to go. So you shift and you flow into another direction. But it's always about that first small next step. That's one of the things that's
Mhm.
really key. And it's a shift we have to make because we're so conditioned to think about outcomes and think about achievements and goals, when all our intuition asks us to do is follow it for that next small step.
Yeah. And how freeing is that? Because, someone like me who always had to know what that next step is, it really speaks to embracing your intuition more so that you're not relying on that because we can't possibly have it all figured out. And it keeps us from making any forward momentum. when we're stuck in that, I need to know what happens next. So for me, it's been really freeing because now that I know how my intuition speaks to me, it's like I just know to follow it, even if I don't know where it's taking me. So it's really a beautiful process that's unfolded, and it takes a little while to get there, but I'm happy to be there.
Yeah, it's a lifelong cultivation, really. It's not something that you ever like, okay, I figured out my intuition. I'm gonna just live a perfect life. Because the thing about intuition is it's always calling us forward. It always wants us to grow and expand, and it wants us to see the truth. And oftentimes we think we have it all figured out, right? So then our intuition is going to lead us to things that might cause us to see something in a different way. And sometimes that's surprising, and sometimes that's not what we expected, or sometimes it causes us to get outside our comfort zone, and that process continues throughout our life. So it's really important to stay in that open mindset of trust and just following your intuition and your true self and your inner guidance wherever it leads you. And trusting that sometimes, even if it doesn't feel good, say you start a podcast and no one ever listens to it, you get zero listeners. Well, bummer. But not that that's going to happen to you, but anyone, right? They're like, oh, I thought this was my dream. This was it. Right. And then you realize like, okay, so what did I learn from this? I was clearly called to this. This is something that when you have that feeling inside, when you have that calling and you have that push and that inspiration, that's coming from somewhere. That's a resonant energy that wants you to move forward. You can't get attached to having, well, if I don't have like 50 listeners a month or an episode, I'm a failure or something, right? It's about what intuition knows that you don't know. That one person that you're reaching today that you helped or that you changed the way that they viewed the world. And then maybe there are 3 or 4 people tomorrow, and there's 10 people, and then the people that those people help. So it's a real ripple effect. And especially in today, the social media and all of the stuff that's out there. It's so easy to get our goals aligned in the wrong place. And that's what I love about what you're doing here, because your work is so heart centered and so authentic. And when you're doing it from that place of heart, you're really connecting personal to personal to with your listeners and your watchers. And this is something that is so key when we're watching something, is having that personal truth involved in it. So you're not out there just doing something to achieve a certain goal or have, like have a business effect or something like that. So really staying in that frame of mind of authenticity, well, that really is guided by your intuition too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. Now, I've been studying under you several years now, but like maybe let's look at this from a beginner's mind. So there's a lot of misconceptions about intuition. So could you tell us a little bit about what your intuition is versus what it is not?
Yes, yes, that's like one of my favorite questions. It's the biggest question, right? Because what happens with our intuition is that if we don't know exactly what it is, we can mistake it and then get sort of frustration or disillusion because we think we're following our intuition, but we're really not. We're really following something that wasn't our intuition. If it doesn't work out, then we get frustrated. So it's so key to understand. Really, there's just a few things. When we work in Intuition Lab, when we start to focus on that, that really clarifies it, right? So what are the things we talk about? So we have to make sure that intuition is, it's not an emotion, right? It's not a feeling. It's not a hope, a wish, a dream, a fear. Those are things that are so implicitly mistaken for intuition. If we have something that we want, a desire, a certain sort of emotion that comes with that desire can be mistaken for intuition. And then if we follow the wrong thing, then we don't actually learn to trust our intuition. So what we need to remember is intuition comes from that place of quiet peace and power. You might be moved or inspired to do something, but you're not moved by fear. You're not like, oh my gosh, I don't do this. My life is over. I have to accomplish it. That's not intuition, right? If you're like, oh, I need to go out and do this because then all my friends will think I'm great. That's not intuition, right? Intuition is that little small voice inside you that says, this will be good for you. This will help you to grow. This will help you to be who you are, to be that self realized version of you. That's what intuition is about. So that's what we want to follow and listen, because it comes from that place of peace and power. It might be powerful, but it's not going to be emotional. It's not going to be fearful. It's not going to come from a place of too much excitement. There's a simplicity of it and a simple movement that comes. So realizing that the peace is in there and the power is in there too. Just because it's, still and quiet doesn't mean it's not powerful and strong. It doesn't have the ability to move you forward. So that's one of the real keys to intuition. The other thing is that some people are like, "Oh, it's just you're unconscious." And this is like one of my pet peeves when people talk about intuition, like, "Oh, it's just this unconscious thing where like instinct, where like birds fly south for the winter." But intuition isn't unconscious at all. It's higher consciousness. So there's nothing unconscious about intuition. It's 100% the opposite of that. So when you're using your intuition, you're using your full consciousness, your full knowingness, your highest awareness. It's when you're sleeping at night and dreaming, you might get some of that backdoor intuition that slips in through your unconscious, gives you messages or little guiding moments or scenarios. But your true inner guidance system takes you to a place of power and knowingness. So, not mistaking those other things that are more unconscious things for intuition is another key. So, I have a whole list. I could go on for hours. Is there any other ones that was particularly helpful to you?
No, I mean, really for me, I mean, kind of going back to the podcast, using my voice was big for me, even in the work that we've been doing together over the last few years. It's funny when I had that intuitive moment where I clicked that link, it brought up some things for me. I had done a workshop for you, and I remember you saying like, "Oh, your voice was so beautiful and that was so great." And then I also had this like vision of when I was a child and I was singing and I asked someone how I sounded and the response was not so great.
Mhm.
Um it was like, "Wait, that's been sitting in my subconscious for how many years and that's something that needs to come out to the surface." And I didn't even it's not like that comment to me that I didn't sound great was playing on my conscious mind at all, you know? Um, but because it came up when I thought about using my voice in a podcast, and then after doing the workshop with you, you were like, "Your voice is so beautiful." So it's just interesting to see how it all kind of interplayed together to create this, yes, this is something you need to do. Just having these little flashbacks to being a little girl and then the work I've been doing and how it's talking to me and then start a podcast. What, you know? So just there was this whole theme around using my voice, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And your voice is beautiful. That was one of the first things that struck me when I heard your podcast for the first time. I was like, wow, I never noticed it because I never just focused on your voice. It was always just the whole package. But when I just heard your voice alone, I was like, wow, it's just a beautiful resonance in your voice. So I love that this whole thing really helped you to go back and sort of heal that incident in your life that was giving you false information about yourself. That's what intuition will do. And the fact that all of that aligned at the same time is significant because, there is that
Mhm.
healing that's coming with this process. And I love the fact that you had no intention of anything when you click that link, right? And that's how intuition gets you. It just draws your attention to something and you don't know why. But if you follow through with
Mhm.
that, and just keep trusting, and then these sort of ideas start coming in, and those ideas, like think about all the ideas, inspiration, intuition, insight, all of these have the in beginning because they're all related to this sort of experience that comes from within us, from that deep dimension, that all knowing part of ourselves. Because we don't know everything. We like to think we got it all figured out. We don't know what we don't know. That's really the truth of it all. But our intuition does. And that's the key is when we start to rely on that and understand that even if something, we don't know why we're doing something, well, there's a part of us that knows why. We have to trust that
Mhm.
part of us. And eventually we'll figure it out. And that's really actually a good sign that you're living into with your intuition when you're not exactly sure what you're doing.
Mhm. Yeah. Again, takes the pressure off having to, right? Because that's
That,
stressful.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
there's a quote, I believe it's Albert Einstein's quote that you use in your book, Radical Intuition, and I love it because it really puts the whole thing into perspective and I don't know if I have the quote exact, but you talk about using your intuitive mind first
Mm.
and then allowing the thinking mind to kind of join in. I love the way you teach that approach.
Yeah, I love that quote too. And I use it somewhere. I think someone in class pointed out, like, I'm not sure. I think he was just accredited to saying that. So he's attributed to saying that. I don't know if he actually said it or not, but it's a great quote. And Einstein actually was a really huge advocate of intuition, whether or not he said that particular thing or not. It really does sum up the discord that's happening, I think, right now at this point in history and, within the last particularly 100 years when we've had all of this explosion in technology and information, that we really got so caught up in the intellectual mind and being intelligent and smart and figuring things out. We've just sort of let this other side of our brain go lax. And great thinkers like Steve Jobs, Einstein, and I mean, writers and artists and innovators of all kinds have realized that that other side of our brain, that the people who are like the left-handed people who use the right side of the brain when we were growing up, get a bad rap because they're like, oh, that's just like the artsy side of your brain. And they just kind of rush it off. Like, if, remember, they would make people learn their parents' generation, they'd make them learn to write with their other hand because the right hand, that's where the importance is. This is the side of brain we want to develop. But they forgot about something really important that's over here. That's our genius and our intuition. And we're just realizing now how unbalanced we've become by forcing people into that sort of left brain mentality. Because our right brain is primarily where our intuition is processed. And that's through things like creativity and imagination, inspiration, and all that other stuff we talked about. That's where the part of our brain that allows that stuff to sort of come into our bodies and minds. And so by making intuition as opposed to our intellect, that sort of primary catalyst to the thinking process, and then using our intellect to make sense of our intuition and to follow through on our intuition. That's really the secret sauce. Today, we just leave intuition out of the picture altogether. We just pretend like it doesn't exist and we just follow our thinking. And that only gets us so far. It's really limited. And I was writing about this. I'm working on my new book, Illumination Code, right now. And I was just writing about this week. And it's even interesting to me how much it relates to quantum computing. So it's the computers that we actually build are a lot like our minds, right? So we've been working with regular old computers for the last 50 years or whatever. All of these computers are binary. They work on ones and zeros, just like the right side, the right-handed left side of our brain. We're binary. We information process, linear, cause and effect. This plus this equals this. We figure out and solve our problems. But along is coming quantum computing. And quantum computing is a lot like quantum thinking, which is intuition. Intuition is our way of quantum thinking, of instantly knowing answers instead of having to figure them out, and having access to that sort of higher information than we have with this sort of classical Newtonian mind. So quantum computers, not only are they linear, but they can be a one or a zero, but they can be both at the same time. And they're so fast that they get information so fast that they can actually start to predict things in the future. They're blurring the lines between, artificial intelligence and intelligence. So we're really getting into, with quantum computing, we're getting into that zone of intuition. We're getting into that place where the mind and consciousness is actually something that we have to look at it in a whole other way, because all of this stuff is part of one system, but we have just been ignoring half the system for so long. And if we really want to move forward in our personal lives and at large in the world, we have to touch in to both sides of the situation, balance it out. And as we know, intuition comes first. There's no way around it. Your intuition pops in before your brain can figure it out any day of the week, just like the quantum computer. It figures out the answer in a second, and it'll take weeks, months, years for a regular computer to figure out the same issue. It's no different in our minds. Our intuition comes in fast and first, and it'll give us that instant impression. That person you just met is off. Something's not right about him. You don't know why. With your mind, you got to meet him. You got to find stuff out about him. You got to figure it out. But my intuition knew it before I did any of that stuff. So making the mind the faithful servant of our intuition is a secret recipe for living a happy, smart, productive life in all ways.
Beautiful. I know. I remember asking you once, I'm like, do you ever make decisions anymore? And you were like, no, it's just intuitive hits all day. And I love that. I can't wait to get to that point. I mean, I understand you still got to use your thinking mind or else we wouldn't have one. But I love how you said it, like fast and first. And it's like done, moving on, right? It would just save us so much time.
Yeah, yeah, and it's always easy. Like I'm like everybody else. There's sometimes when you just don't know, but most of the times when I don't just get into that flow and just follow it, it's just because there's not a decision to be made. Like sometimes it just
Mhm.
you want to go do something. It's, oh, should I do this or that? And the answer is just wait. It's not the time. This will come when it's right. You know it, and you move and you follow it, and there's just that sense of resonance and openness and expansion that comes with it. So yeah, that is like one of my jokes. Like I don't make decisions anymore. I realized that because I was like, I'm creating all these different intuitive tools to help make decisions, and I was like, wow, I'm like, I don't need help making a decision because that I just it just happens. Like it feels right or it doesn't feel right. It feels expansive, it doesn't feel expansive, and that kind of thing. So it becomes second nature after a while, right? And
Yeah.
you get into that zone, and then your intuitive mind is reinforced by your rational mind. It's like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm gonna do this, right?
Yeah, I love it. And I can speak to that from the experience I've had with doing Intuition Lab and how you've created the card decks for your students. And it's a great tool to learn in the beginning, but it's funny. I mean, 3 years ago, I relied on my cards very heavily, but now
Yeah.
I don't need them. It's like things are just dropping in constantly. An image. I was just on jury duty, and it was interesting because I knew what my thought of this case was within 10 minutes of hearing the case. And it was a lawsuit situation, and I knew right away. And of course, I don't know if I think you've done jury duty before, but you can't deliberate for until the case is over. So I was like dying waiting to see what everybody's opinion of the case was, and it was very obvious that we were all on the same page. But I knew right then, within 10 minutes, I knew the way that it was going to go. And then even when we were listening to closing arguments, I kind of had this image in my mind with the plaintiff kind of like sitting on the tipping scale, and he was like sitting on it. So he like had the case, right? So like I got that image,
Beautiful.
and it was great because it was like a validation that, yes, I was right 3 days ago when I first heard this case, and then when I went into the room to deliberate, we were all on the same page, so it's like I knew, and just seeing that image during closing arguments was just my validation that I was right from the very beginning, so it was really cool, and just being aware of my intuition even in that moment when it's kinda stressful sitting there
Yeah.
in a case and listening to everything happening, and, so yeah, just allowing it to kinda be there, and I didn't even realize it was, I just I knew what the image meant, like, "Oh, there's my intuition talking to me," so just having that recognition of it being there always is, something really cool.
Yeah, and that's really cool too, how you just the different ways that you can receive intuition. That's such a great example of how you can get an intuitive impression just by that feeling right off the bat. You had a sense or feeling. But then you can get these other things like an image that pops into your head, use your meta senses. There's so many different ways that our intuition can give us those validations. So that's a really cool story. And I love that it's a great opportunity to like play around with your intuition, right? Situations like that, you can put your intuition to the test and really start to build trust because you're like, okay, I was right. I picked up on this energy. It felt right. And then you continue to build on that and other things in your
So you'd mentioned you're writing another book, The Illumination Code. How exciting is that?
oh
Well,
my God.
and I'm happy to hear more about it, but I have to just say Radical Intuition, which is where I first heard of your work, I think I read it like 3 times, and it was more so I wanted to know, like, when I first read it, there was things about it that just hit me, and I love how you take kind of that spiritual approach and you kind of blend it with your more tech background, and it just the way it was written really captured me. But then after I did a year of Intuition Lab, I read it again, and it was so interesting how I picked up on different parts of the book that I hadn't really picked up on before, and it was just another testament that, things were developing a little further and I was seeing things a little differently. So yeah, I love that book, so definitely wanna plug that one, but I'm excited to hear more about, the Illumination Code.
Yeah, so, I really love first of all, Radical Intuition was really like a dream come true book for me. That was the book that I really had in me for the last probably 10 years. And, a lot of the issue, because it's not like any other intuition book that you read. And, I wrote one of the original intuition books of our generation back in 2004, the psychic workshop. And, at that time it was revolutionary because, the big idea back then was that, oh yeah, you can actually develop intuition and psychic ability. It's not something you're magically born with, because when we were kids and growing up, a lot of the sentiment was, oh, certain people are psychic and certain people aren't. And so that first book really came out to sort of help to break down those barriers as all of us are psychic. But, moreover than that, and that's what I realized over the last 10, 15 years with the second book, working in technology and working in, the career that followed, is intuition is not just about woo woo stuff. It's core part of who we are and is very practical and applies to everything we do. And especially working in tech and working in innovation and working with creative people and artists. And you realize how essential it is to vision, right? Even the work that you're doing and our calling and our passion, our intuition is a key part of that. So I really wanted to understand intuition and break it down in a way that everybody could understand it and how it affects them, even if they weren't a quote unquote psychic or artist or something that was a generalized sort of area where intuition was naturally infused. Intuition helps every single person, the scientist, the mathematician, all of it. Everybody really will benefit from understanding how that intuitive part of their brain works. So that's what I started out to do with radical intuition, was really to get into that space of knowing that, hey, we got to wake up. Intuition is part of our bodies and our minds and our hearts and our spirits. And if we don't use that, we're leaving a whole part of our power on the table, right? It's there. And so I really wanted to help people to find that and tap into it. So now the next step from the feedback of people like you and folks in the Intuition Lab and people who read the book is, yeah, we're on board. Okay. Intuition, we got it. Intuition is like one of those things, once you start to practice it, it proves itself to you, right? Most people had little, experiences throughout their life that have made them curious about intuition if they don't already believe it. But then once you actually start to, practice it intentionally, it's like, okay, there's definitely something here. You've seen it in the lab when people take higher powers and they're like, mind is blown. And like, guys, that's what happens, right? So the next question after that was like, so like, how does this work? How does it even work? Like, we understand that it works, but how does it work? So with the Illumination Code, I really dove into quantum physics because, for me, I always say that intuition is a type of quantum thinking. And I really believe that because, we think again with our linear minds, just like the classical world around us, but the quantum world inside us is spontaneous and unpredictable and mystical. And all of this stuff that has the same exact characteristics as intuition. So I'm really exploring how to explain things like telepathy, remote viewing, all of the different things, psychometry, the things that we do, that we practice with our intuition. How does that work on a quantum level? Like, what does that all mean? How does it all come together so we can actually experience the quantum universe in our own lives, in our own psyche, instead of reading about it in books? People are like, oh, how to really apply quantum physics? It's also interesting, but what does it all really mean? Well, we're using it all the time. And to me, things like the supernatural, quote unquote, is just a sign that we have not figured it out with science yet. But the thing is, quantum physics explains the supernatural. Quantum physics is the missing link, the unified theory that gives us an understanding of why things that are so-called impossible things, the things we do in higher powers specifically, and other things in Intuition Lab, why we can do that. Because we're all connected by this inner invisible 0 point field of energy that conveys information between us. And it allows for that part of us that knows everything to connect with all the other things in the world and all that data bank, that universal data bank, aka the Akashic field. We've heard about that in the sort of Eastern mysticism, to tap into all of that information. So it's so fascinating to me. I've really been on this road of discovery, really diving into all of these different principles and in physics and showing how they actually explain things like through quantum entanglement and things like that we're really starting to feel. And there's, physicists out there that are leading this charge. I'm not going to pretend to be a physicist. I'm a minor in physics, but I'm not a quantum physicist. So all of the stuff in this book is sort of extrapolated from the work of maverick physicists that are out there leading the charge and saying, yeah, mysticism and physics are really powerfully connected.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you're right. It's the next step because now we have so much awareness. I don't remember where I heard this, but human beings are like making that next evolutionary step that we haven't made in like 40,000 years. Before it was using our minds, right? Just trying to survive. And now we're making that next leap into, integrating our intuitive side. And I was just listening to another podcast where she had on a physician, he was a heart surgeon, who he realized there's only a certain level of knowledge that I have. And then once he's got the patient on the table, it's like he kind of opens it up to his intuitive side to kind of guide him through the surgery. So just that there's this awareness on such big levels is really, really amazing to hear. And you see so many people waking up to this idea that there's another way, to handle our lives. And it's beautiful.
Yeah, I keep one of the taglines I think that we're using for this book is the new frontier is the inner frontier, right? And I think that's the
Mm.
key. And we've been spending so much time looking out here. We've done it. We've looked out there. There's lots out there, but we need to really look in here. It's a microcosmic world, and then you understand why terms like inner wisdom apply, because this is the wisdom that comes out of that, implicit field of intrinsic knowing that's within us that touches into that cosmic field of energy. So it comes from within us. So all these years, people were using inner wisdom like it's this sort of, flu sort of term, but really that is a way of knowledge retrieval by tuning into that data, right? Because there is a whole world of sensory data within us. There's a whole world of information within us. And when we go down to the microcosmic level, to the deeper level, that's when we can access this part of us that knows everything. And I think it's so important for us to understand how it works. Because it's one thing believing in intuition and recognizing that it works, but it's another thing when we actually finally understand how it works, right? So it's not just a mystery, right? Understanding that it works by these quantum connections, these sort of little intrinsic quanta of light within us that hold and embed information and connect us to the everythingness of all knowingness of the whole world. That's how we tap into it. That's how we tap into that non-local information that's not here in our own personal consciousness. And physics has proved exists. So this isn't anything that goes against physics. We know now that there's a non-local field that's around us. And non-locality basically means that we can access something, whether it's close to us or not. It is not directly local to us in space or time. A great example is the Akashic records. So one of the physicists that I've really admired and working with his ideas in the book is Urban Laszlo. And he wrote a book called the Akashic field, and how that idea of the 0 point field of energy that holds all the information is like the Akashic field and the Akashic records that we could tap into and learn all these things about the past and about something that's happening far away, and like remote viewing. All of these things are possible because all of this data is embedded in this field around us. So it really is a question of information and accessing it and where we get it. And from the outside world and our senses, we get our information from out there. But with our intuition, we get our information from within here and our meta senses and all of that stuff deep within that can guide us. And that's better because it knows everything. The outside world, we just know what's like right here and around us, what we can see and feel and interact with. But when we go from the inside, we have access to all of the information that's out there. And that's why intuition is better, because it has a higher perspective.
Mm. I got chills. I'm excited to read more about
So
this. It's great. It's great.
I'm just in like all that. So I really got a lot of work to do, but that's how excited I'm like really excited about some of these ideas. So yeah, that's what you'll be hearing more of next year.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I hope we're convincing people to develop their intuition more. So you have the Intuition Lab. I love what you said about Intuition Lab, that you were going to crack the code on intuition. And so you created Intuition Lab, which I've been a part of for 3 years.
Mhm.
Not only just what I've gained from learning, but just the community that you provide is worth so much, because a lot of people who start to navigate this, they don't necessarily find support in their surrounding families or peers or whatever, So, um, community has been huge in what you've created. And I'm sure for you, you've built a community of all these people surrounding you. So,
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you guys, right? It's one of those things where you really want to you feel recharged and inspired when you share a journey with other people. And that's one of the great things that I know that we've talked about with Intuition Lab is the really wonderful groups of people that come through and really just get to light up their intuition along with other people. Because it's one of those things that is really communal because you really need to work with other people to really get it validated and to understand how your own intuition works. So the community is a huge part of it for so many reasons. And even my own, when I grew up and I was learning this, I learned in a community. We didn't have online stuff back then, but I went to a group every Wednesday night and worked with other people. And if I hadn't done that, then I never would have been able to do or get the validations that really became a foundation of a lifelong practice.
Yeah. Um, so how can people find out more about Intuition Lab if they're interested in joining or learning more about you and what you offer?
Yeah. So you can visit our website at intuition-lab.com. And we have some evergreen courses that you can kind of dip your feet in and explore, start playing around with your intuition. And they're interactive. They're a little different from the book because it gives you some opportunities. There's recordings of groups, practices that you can see what other people are doing, and you can actually practice your own stuff live there. And then every fall, we enroll our new year's worth of programs and have our higher powers program, which is our signature program now, where we sort of do all the cool stuff like remote viewing and psychometry and, learning to work with those insight cards and practicing with our intuition and starting to get that kind of daily guidance in our life. So that's a lot of fun. I highly invite anybody who wants to explore, get involved to, just to check out one of our free courses or join us in Higher Powers. This most fun event of the year.
Yeah, I'd say that's where most of the enthusiasm gets started in higher
Mhm.
powers. So
Yes. Yeah, I love it.
great. Well, Kim, thank you so much for coming on. I love talking about intuition. It really has become, everything in my life, not just from my work, but, in my personal life. I was always one of those people who always needed validation from others, or I could never really make a decision on my own. I was always asking what everybody else thought. So it's really changed my life in a lot of big ways. And I think I've even shared with you, I've kind of become my own personal guru. It's like I have what I need inside that I can ask. I don't need to look outside anymore, which I did a lot of. So,
Well, I honestly, I am so honored to be here and to be part of this because watching that sort of transformation in you over the last 3 years and just seeing that's what intuition does. It empowers you, right? It gets you in touch
mhm.
with yourself and empowers you and makes you really confident in who you are and what you do. And that's really key to being happy in our life. So it's been such an honor to share this journey with you. And you're just like such a light and so great. And I'm so honored to have you as part of our faculty. You're, you're just being a little modest. She's not just a student. She's our senior faculty member this year. So I'm just proud to have you in this role and really glad to see all the light that you're bringing in the world with this new stuff that you're doing. And I know it's gonna be great.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you again for coming
My
on.
pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. And if you're ready to begin your intuition journey, Kim has graciously prepared a free 12-page guide for you. Inside the guide, you will learn about the 4 types of intuition, how to use them, and how to also discover your own intuitive type. There's also a 4-step program for activating your intuitive abilities, in addition to daily practices and intuition resources, including meditations and tutorials. To receive your 12-page guide, just go to intuitionalliance.com/intuition awakening guide. I'll be sure to put the exact link in the show notes for you. Lastly, in addition to Kim's books, courses, and workshops, she is a true artist at heart. She designed and created the Illuminate Insight card deck to support your intuitive development. This beautifully illustrated card deck is the #1 tool to help you build trust in your own intuitive language. You can find more information on all of Kim's offerings at kimchestney.com. I've also partnered with Kim and feature her card decks on my online shop as well. I've bundled these cards with a beautiful insight journal and smudge stick to assist you in creating sacred space at home for your intuition journey. You can find the Illuminate bundle on our website, jadescottdesign.com. All of these links will be available in the show notes. Until next time, much love and gratitude.